Agree or disagree?
India prepares for a transition of power to a new party and a new prime minister. Campaigning on the promises to revive the economy, the leader of BJP party, Narendra Modi, secured the most decisive election victory in the country in 3 decades since India's got independence. But what does this victory mean for the country, and what effect will it have on India's domestic and foreign policy? Hello, welcome to Agree or Disagree with me, Marina Joshi, to discuss the historic win of BJP party and its leader, Narendra Modi. I have invited today Lisa Curtis, who is a senior research fellow for South Asia at the Heritage Foundation, and Sreeram Chaulia, who is a professor and dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs in Sonipat, India. Thank you so much, Lisa and Sreeram, for joining me today. And before we begin our discussion about what's next for India under a new leader, I'd like you to give me your take briefly, if you could, on what you personally think of this victory. Does it signal, in your opinion, a new era for the country? Let's start with Lisa.
I think this is a very important election outcome for India and for the U.S., for the world. This is the first time that an Indian party has won the majority of seats in the country in the last 30 years. And I think this was unexpected even by the BJP itself to do this well. So what this means is the BJP won't have to water down its agenda. It won't be impacted as much by its coalition partners because it has such a strong standing within the government. I think this signals that people are ready for a change in India, that the policies of the Congress government were just simply not working for the Indian people anymore. And I think this will be good for the economy of India. The BJP government will probably be more friendly to private businesses, will get the economy moving again, get those growth rates up once again.
And Sreeram, how do you assess this victory and what significance does it have?
It surely is historic because the fragmentation of the polity that had 3 decades long reign has finally ended, and people have decisively given a mandate to a person and a party which has strong nationalistic tendencies and outlooks, and in a way they have empowered the center. Once again, after a long time when there was excessive decentralization and power as well as decision making was becoming increasingly parceled out to different regional satraps. So I think the centralization of the polity is always important. India is a quasi-federal state with supposedly a strong center, but the coalition politics of the last 30 years had reduced it to a mockery, and it was essentially becoming more and more vociferous tendencies had increased, and the overall larger national interests were being disregarded by different states. So I think Mr. Modi and a strong cultural nationalistic outlook as well as an approach to the world which is to announce that India is serious and means business, and India can think in one voice and represent one voice to the international community. So I think this election is a mandate he has received to forge, in a way, a new nation and a new India after these 30 years when power was highly decentralized.
All right. Thank you so much, Sreeram, for this. Now, let's look at what's happening in India and what's likely to be next for the country under a new leader in more detail. Well, certainly the election result is a huge blow to the outgoing Congress party, which has been led by the Nehru-Gandhi family and has been a dominant political force in the country since its independence. I would like to ask you now what you think contributed to Modi's win. I mean, what made him so popular? Sreeram, what do you think?
Modi, I think, came across as somebody who could connect and emote to all hues and colors and castes and even, I dare say, even religions. There is now evidence that Muslims have voted for Mr. Modi in some parts of the country, despite his controversial background when he was Chief Minister of the Western state of Gujarat. So I think overall he could be a kind of a catch-all politician with a very strong charisma, strong oratorical skills, ability to, move the masses with very simple but folksy slogans. The marketing campaign of the BJP was phenomenal. They used Obama-style social media, but also the house-to-house, the door-to-door, the bring out, the vote at the very end. It was a very well-oiled machine, and they had projected him as a superhero, and it worked. because the contrast was with Gandhi-Nehru dynasty that didn't have these kind of charismatic politicians anymore.
Okay, so as we can see, a lot of effort, a lot of effort went...
As a deliverer and a larger-than-life personality, and that worked.
All right, let's now get some assessment from the states. Lisa, I'd like to turn to you now. Could you tell us what was the reaction to this victory in the states? As Sreeram mentioned earlier, it was Obama-style campaign. So what do people in the states say about it?
I think it was a very well-run campaign, and I think they focused on connecting with India's young voters, which was a smart move. You know, it's ironic that Rahul Gandhi, who's a very young politician, but he just simply wasn't able to connect with the Indian voters and was very much a disappointment for the Congress Party. Whereas the BJP, I think, really was able to show itself to be a party for the new century, focused on good governance, focused on bringing the economy along. They really just drove home those points. There was no communal politics, and when there was a controversial statement made by a BJP leader, Modi was very quick to distance himself and even used social media like Facebook to do that. So I think they were very savvy in how they ran the campaign. And I think the second factor was Modi's decisiveness. The last few years, we have seen a very weakened, indecisive Congress leadership. The second term has been a major disappointment. And also from the U.S. perspective, because of this weakened Congress government, the fact that Manmohan Singh was unwilling to show a robust foreign policy affected the U.S.-India relationship. So there is excitement here in the U.S. to have an Indian government that will perhaps have a more robust foreign policy.
Agree or disagree?
I get the impression that India now is in the state of euphoria. Everyone's excited. Everyone's ready for change because people are probably in a way tired of the same party that ruled the country since independence. I mean, the Congress party that's been a dominant political force. And now they are ready for change and they want things to improve, of course. Modi, as we have established earlier, had a very impressive campaign, and his slogans were quite powerful too, and promises. For example, let me just quote some of them. We have to take India forward. We have to fulfill the dreams of more than 1 billion people. India has won. Good days are about to come. Let's now talk about the substance behind these promises. I mean, do you think he will be able to follow through? Because obviously he has a long list of issues to deal with, and both domestically and as far as foreign policy is concerned. So is he the leader that will have the ability to live up to the expectations? Sreeram, what do you think?
Absolutely. If not for him, I think we have no savior, because the system, as we call it here, is so entrenched and so obstructionist in order to make things move or happen at every level. So the entire state machinery, even the crony capitalist networks that are built up around it, have been such that nothing of substance and which can generate some positive outcomes for larger society can happen or has been allowed to happen for a long time. Modi has done it on a small scale in the state of Gujarat, where he was chief minister for 12 years, where he in a way smashed the system and could create a kind of a new reality out of his own personal drive and push. So I think that is where India has been missing for a long time, and I'm very hopeful that he will be able to bring about at least the modernization of the infrastructure, which has been a major bottleneck and which is the reason why we have been lagging behind the Chinese.
Well, certainly it'll be very interesting to see what his first steps will be in power. But Lisa, I'd like to turn to you now, and let's now discuss the foreign policy issues here, and specifically the fact that, I mean, as Sreeram earlier said, Modi is a highly controversial figure because of the riots in Gujarat. Obviously, people are unhappy about it, and he was considered a persona non grata by some Western leaders in, for example, the States as well. What will be happening right now? I mean, are we likely to see a U-turn in the attitudes towards Modi in the States and in other Western countries? Obviously, they will have to rebuild their relationship with a new leader, right?
Yes, I think that, as I said earlier, Modi stayed away from communal politics during the election campaign. And I think that U.S. and Western officials will give Modi a chance to show that he's not going to be a divisive leader, that he will stay focused on improving the Indian economy for everyone's benefit in India. So I think it is important that the Obama administration signal that it's ready to do business with Modi, that it's not going to linger on the Gujarat issue, the Gujarat rioting. And in fact, President Obama did reach out to Modi in a phone call and congratulated him on his victory and invited him to Washington, D.C. So I think that's a positive gesture. I think it was very important. The U.S. was behind the curve in engaging Modi. The British had been meeting with him since 2012, and in my opinion, I think the Obama administration should have reached out to Modi as soon as it was clear that he was going to be leading the party in the election. But of course, the U.S. ambassador did not meet with Modi until February, right before the elections began. So the U.S. does have to make up for some lost time and demonstrate that it welcomes Modi's victory and looks forward to working with him in the future.
All right. Well, Sreeram, how instrumental is the United States for India? I mean, how important is the U.S. relationship for India?
Bilateral trade is right now, if you add goods and services together, over $100 billion. So there's no denying the importance of the economic relationship. Well, what has happened in the process, though, is that there are expectations on the part of American businesses and the U.S. chambers that the Indian market will be opened up further and that there will be more opportunities for them to do business, and also in terms of controlling copyright violations and these kind of things. So the chambers of commerce have been raising some red flags of late, saying, India is not quite creating the kind of bonanza that we had expected. So,
and why is that? I mean, why is that? Is it due to the system, the complexities of the system that you mentioned earlier, or is it due to sort of the cautious position?
It's also because India is nationalistic. Mm-hmm. And the Indian system does not want to be seen to be kowtowing to Western power that is, by the way, spying upon all our communications. The National Security Agency had India fourth on its list. The expectation is that Modi will ease some of the bottlenecks as far as licensing and as far as foreign direct investment goes, but doesn't mean that on the strategic and the political side that India is going to somehow become a junior partner of the United States. And that's where Modi is going to be very clear.
Yeah, that's certainly a very interesting point here. You said that Modi is a nationalistic leader and he's got nationalistic views, but is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? I mean, in the long run, might it not shake the balance in the Asian Pacific region and create some tension there? Lisa, what is your take?
Yeah, so my take is that because the Modi-led government is expected to pursue a more robust foreign policy than the Congress Party did, there are actually opportunities for the U.S.-India relationship to move forward, particularly in the Asia-Pacific. Look, New Delhi and Washington do share similar objectives, whether it involves countering terrorism, maintaining open and free seaways, hedging against China's rise. Just a year ago, we had an incident where the Chinese infiltrated across the Indian border and set up camp for several weeks, and it caused a great deal of tension between the two countries. So I think the BJP recognizes that China is a challenge. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't build the India-China relationship. I think you'll continue to see this sort of hedging behavior, but I think because a BJP government will be more willing to acknowledge external threats and take initiatives to mitigate those threats, that will actually open opportunities for U.S.-India cooperation, whether it be defense cooperation, maritime cooperation, or simply more engagement over the U.S.-Asia pivot strategy. I think we will see some more opportunities opening up between the U.S. and India.
But do you think Americans will seize that chance? I mean, the American leadership, to be more precise.
Well, I think that's a good question because the Obama administration has not been taking the kind of initiative on foreign policy that I think we had hoped that it would. And so there is a real question about whether White House will take advantage of this opportunity, this very real opportunity to prioritize the relationship with India.
We discussed, or perhaps made some speculations, rather, of how the relationship between India and the U.S. will develop. And you said that this is, in fact, a decisive moment for Americans and, in fact, a good opportunity to seize this chance to reinvigorate the relationship with a country.
I think we should wait and see because, like I said, it was a good first step that Obama actually called Modi, invited him to the U.S. And part of the reason I think that the Obama administration had not put so much effort into the India relationship was simply because there was such lackluster interest by the Singh administration in its second administration. I think the White House had sort of given up on trying to move things forward with India because they just weren't getting a response from the Singh government in the second administration.
Okay, why do you think the Singh administration wasn't interested in maintaining a good relationship with the United States or fostering more ties or to keep the relationship going in the positive direction?
Well, it was just that the Singh administration was focused on its domestic problems. There were so many corruption scandals. There was this sense that the government, was not paying attention to issues like the violence against women that was happening. That I just think that Prime Minister Singh, perhaps he was tired, perhaps there were health issues, but there was not the energy to focus on the foreign policy and specifically with relations with the U.S. I don't think there was an intentional snubbing of the U.S. I simply think that there was just lack of energy and focus. And most of the attention was going to managing the domestic problems.
So as we can see right now, there are a lot of expectations of Modi, and as they say, time will tell. But now let's look at other aspects that could come into play here. India is a member of BRICS, right? The group that consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And also India is a member of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. How instrumental will its role be in those groups? Sreeram, what do you think, with Modi being India's new prime minister?
I think Modi is savvy enough and smart enough to realize that we cannot place our eggs in any one basket of major powers, but rather we need to spread our risks and our bets. And as far as BRICS and SCO go, these are important regional organizations. And I think Modi is very cognizant of the fact about our collective determination in this group to create a multipolar world. When we say we want to create a multipolar world, it obviously goes against the interests, the core goals of the United States. So at this level, there is a contradiction. So while we maintain mutually beneficial bilateral relationships with the United States for economy and for technology and even potentially for nuclear commerce, we are at odds, and it must be acknowledged, is that the United States wants a world that is not going multipolar. The BRICS and the SCO are instruments to achieve a more egalitarian world order, where there are some controls and checks upon, the expanding NATO and all these factors in Eastern Europe.
In the region, yeah.
Well, and we'll also want to create our own institutions, global institutions, which contradict what the IMF and the World Bank have done thus far, which have been disappointing.
Okay, well, Sreeram, sorry for interrupting you.
There's a lot of potential to leverage this side of our relationship and not to just leave it out all in favor of
Okay, you made very interesting points here. I'd like to bring in Lisa now. And Lisa, to what extent do you agree or disagree with what Sreeram just said?
Well, I think that Modi's going to adopt, an India-first policy. And certainly they'll continue the engagement with the BRICS, but I think we can argue, how effective the BRICS have been as a grouping, and I don't think we have seen much concrete action there. But when it comes to relations with China, as I said, I think we'll see both an effort to build up the economic relationship, but at the same time to stand up to any perceived Chinese aggression along their
What about the multipolarity
borders
that Sreeram just said? I mean, India, as he said, wants to be part of the multipolar world and offer some strategies for creating this sort of multipolarity in the region. But according to Sreeram, U.S. may be in opposition to that. Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, and frankly, the whole multipolarity idea, I'm not sure how much the BJP leadership will be attached to that. The BJP is very pragmatic, and I think they're going to be looking at India's national security interests and what serves India. And like I said, any multipolar grouping right now looks a little tenuous. They've got border problems with China that they have to remain cognizant of. And frankly, I think the U.S. can be helpful in terms of managing those tensions with China. So I think they're going to do what's best for India in terms of managing that relationship. And when it comes to Indian Russian ties, I think certainly they're going to maintain that historically close partnership. So that bilateral relationship, I think, will remain strong between Russia and India. But when it comes to the whole idea of multipolarity, I think a BJP government's going to be a little bit circumspect, and they're going to look first at India's national security and recognize that perhaps this idea of multipolarity is not very practical at this particular stage.
Well, we talked about different aspects of...
I'd like to just interject on that.
Sure, go ahead.
Can I, Mary? Yeah, multipolarity is the only structural configuration through which India can find itself as a major power. As long as there's no multipolarity, India is going to remain confined to a South Asian or a subcontinental power. And I think the BJP think tank knows very well that we need to engineer our rise to a great power status. And it can only happen when the world becomes multipolar, because nobody can stop the rise of China, right? So while we have our problems with the Chinese, on issue base, on specific items of cooperation, there will be cooperation. But at the same time, of course, we are quite wary of the Chinese. But to bring in the Americans to counter the Chinese, that's the kind of game we've been trying to avoid. I think the BJP will continue to avoid it. Wherever necessary, we will need to build our own self-reliance and our own means to be able to counter the Chinese. And in the process, if there is multipolarity, I don't think there's a contradiction between having problems with China and seeking a multipolar world.
Agree or disagree?
Well, at this point, I'd like to make a quick reminder for our listeners, maybe just joining us here on Radio VR, that with my guest today, I'm discussing a historic moment for India that is preparing for a transition of power to a new party and a new prime minister. With me today, I have Sreeram Chaulia, who's a professor and dean at Jindal School of International Affairs in Sinapat in India, and Lisa Curtis, who is a senior research fellow for South Asia at the Heritage Foundation. We have talked about India's relationship with its neighbors such as China and basically India's prospective role in the Southeast Asia. But what about its nearest neighbor, Pakistan? Sreeram, how do you think the relationship will evolve with that country?
Well, even here, let me just go back to, because it's a triangle. The United States has been pumping so much military aid into Pakistan over the last, decade. Mm-hmm. Since the war on terror began, and it's been $20 or more billion, if I'm not wrong. And a lot of this has gone into conventionally balanced against India in terms of military, not into countering terrorism or to fighting the jihadists. So we have had a problem with this factor. And I think we'll continue to emphasize that, if we want American cooperation, we want it in a way which will reduce the extent and the firepower of the jihadists and control them in Pakistan and prevent them from being huge menaces on our soil. So that's one. As far as the overall relationship with Pakistan goes, I think the BJP, again, is going to react very strongly if there are terrorist attacks. But if there are no major terrorist attacks like the Mumbai mayhem that we saw a few years ago, what they will try to do is to revive the kind of peace process which the previous administration from 1998 to 2004 had launched. And the idea will be to try and come up with a final settlement for the Kashmir dispute, which they claim last time they came very close. According to anecdotes, in 2004, when the previous BJP government lost the elections unexpectedly, General Musharraf, who was then the president of Pakistan, called Mr. Vajpayee, who had just left office as prime minister, saying, "What happened? We thought we had a deal and we were working it out." Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, democracy intervened and the people voted against the BJP in 2004.
Okay.
So I hope that the next 5 years, Modi could even be a two-term prime minister. He's the kind of person who can continue to rule with great popularity if he delivers on even some of his promises.
Well, sure.
Because the opposition is totally bankrupted. So I'm hoping that in 10 years, we can really finally end this fratricidal conflict that's been on for the last 65 years.
That's the thing, because at this point, people have a lot of hopes and expectations, but it's still early days. He hasn't really started doing anything yet. But again, time will tell, and we can now, at this point, only speculate and make predictions. Now, Lisa, I'd like to get your thoughts on India's relationship with Pakistan. Are we likely to see any thaw there, any rapprochement, if you will?
I actually think with Modi's rise to power comes an increased likelihood of greater Indo-Pakistani tensions, and there is that potential for military escalation, the kind that we saw in 2001, 2002, when both sides mobilized along the border, and this followed a terrorist attack on India's parliament in 2001. And I think there's a major terrorist attack, along these lines or along the lines of the 2008 Mumbai attacks. Certainly a BJP government would react more strongly than we saw the Congress government act. Prime Minister Singh really had this commitment to peaceful ties with Islamabad, even in the face of attacks that were traced back to Pakistan. And I just don't see that a BJP government would have that same kind of patience. It is true that a peace process did move forward under the previous BJP government under the leadership of Vajpayee. But I think Modi and Vajpayee are very different leaders. Even though Modi has said he wants to follow in Vajpayee's footsteps with regard to Kashmir and Pakistan, he is saying that. But I think when it comes down to it, these are two different personalities that we are talking about. And I think that there is a greater chance for some kind of escalation of tensions. We hope that it doesn't happen. We hope that there's no major attack in India. But this will be something that we have to, I think, be prepared for. If there is a major attack, I think there's a greater chance that it could result in military escalation than we saw under the Congress government.
Well, certainly, as we can see just hearing what you, Lisa, and Sreeram said, we are on the doorstep of some major changes in the country, both domestically and as far as foreign policy is concerned. So India is about to turn a new leaf in its history and sort of start a new era. Whether the hopes and expectations of the people will be met, that remains to be seen, and we will see it very shortly once the new prime minister assumes his office and starts meeting other global leaders and establish himself on the global political arena. And of course, after that, it will be clear what sort of direction he will take in his policies, both at home and abroad. For now, though, I'd like to thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and insight with me here on Agree or Disagree with me today. On the phone line from India, I had Sreeram Chaulia, who's professor and dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs in Sonipat, India, and Lisa Curtis, who's a senior research fellow for South Asia at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you so much, Sreeram, for being in the program and sharing your thoughts and views with me.